Over the last few years, I've spent weeks of my life and kilos of filament testing out all the various multicolor and multi-material systems for open source 3D printers so that you don't have to. So when BigTreeTech originally unveiled a prototype of their ViViD MMU system for Klipper over 1 year ago, I'll admit that my interest was piqued. A plug-and-play, RFID capable and expandable MMU for any Klipper 3D printer with filament drying capability for under 300 bucks. I mean, what's not to love, right? So in this video, we're going to get it installed on one of my open source printers, test it out, and hopefully by the end of this video, figure out if it lives up to that very exciting value proposition. Let's get after it. The first order of business in installing any such multicolor system is going to be upgrading your toolhead to include two things. One, a filament cutter, and two, at least one filament entry sensor. Yes, technically, you can do so-called tip tuning and configure the system to retract your filament, but most of the designers of the various systems, including BigTreeTech with their ViViD, highly recommend that you skip all of that if you want to achieve any level of reliability. Personally, I chose to install the ViViD on the Sovol SV08 Max, not so much because I necessarily needed multicolor capabilities over there, though it will be nice to have, but more because on a printer this large, it sure would be nice to be able to make use of the filament backup endless spool feature when one filament type runs out, especially for some big projects I have coming up soon on the channel. Plus, now that I have the SV08 Max enclosed, I'd really like a way to keep my more exotic filaments dry during printing. Now, when it comes to toolhead designs, we're honestly spoiled for choice. Because the SV08 Max is open source, I could easily have built a completely new toolhead for it, such as the Stealth Burner, the Dragon Burner, the Jabberwocky, or many, many more. I actually did an entire video just on the 20 or so top open source toolhead designs, so if you're considering adding an MMU to your own printer or just want to level up its performance, you might want to check that video out before you finish this one. Anyways, for my build, I opted to reuse as many of the original parts as possible, and luckily for me, my friends over at CN3D do already have an upgraded version of the original SV08 Max toolhead that suited my needs. It adds a toolhead board fan, a filament cutter, and one or two filament entry sensors. Now, I actually originally chose to print a bunch of the parts in ultra tough tooling resin on my Hagears Reflex 2, but I probably should have just printed them out of ABS because that's what they're designed for, and some of the resin parts did warp. Now, if you're curious about the assembly process for this toolhead, I actually did an entire live stream with Nadir on his channel, which you can link below. Just please don't judge me because I was building it with what turns out to be a broken thumb, maybe. Doctor can't really tell me. Naturally, this being me, I did run into all kinds of annoying issues like defective micro switches, so while I wait for the replacement parts to come in the mail, let's talk about installing the actual ViViD MMU. BigTreeTech designed the ViViD to be as plug and play as possible, and as far as the MMU itself is concerned, it definitely lives up to that promise. You simply plug it into a separate power outlet and run a USB cable to the printer's USB port. And then you run a Molex cable between the MMU box and the buffer. Now the buffer can be daisy chained to 3 more ViViD units to allow up to 16 color printing. Everything was very plug and play, besides needing to cut the various PTFE tubes down to your own desired length. My only complaint, at least regarding this part of the installation, is that the ViViD unit is pretty clearly tailored to a rear entry installation, such as that on a Voron 2.4. And that means that the filament slots are numbered and they need to correspond to the correct exit for each filament on the MMU itself. So they expect you to kind of loop it back on itself. Now for my setup, I wanted the filament to enter via the existing hole on the top right of the enclosure, which meant that the buffer kind of sits upside down on top of the printer and the filament paths are kinked in a way that they're not nearly as smooth as I would have liked. Now, this isn't a big deal, of course. I might just custom design some kind of bracket to hold the buffer in that hole vertically, but it is something worth noting as you plan your own build. If the hardware installation was easy, the firmware upgrade unfortunately was anything but. BigTreeTech has published their own software package for adding MMU capability to Klipper based on the popular Happy Hair upgrade used by the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder. Now, it includes interface updates for mainsail, macros for operating the MMU unit, as well as changes to the default Klipper screen interface for ease of use. And if you're running mainline Klipper, it should be as easy as just SSHing into the printer, running a few commands, and then answering a few questions to configure it for your exact setup. Unfortunately, as I've griped about quite a few times in the past, Sovol does have a nasty habit of shipping their printers with all sorts of little changes to Klipper, and I had no idea how much of a hassle this would present. First, I tried to install the BigTreeTech software right onto the original firmware that shipped with the printer, and that didn't work at all. So I then tried to flash a version of mainline Klipper that someone published for the standard SV08 to a spare eMMC module, but that presented a whole new range of problems. Even after copying macros and config files over from the SV08 Max, I still had a ton of issues. I mean, the eddy coil for bed probing just didn't work, the touchscreen became completely unresponsive, and a lot more. It turns out that the SV08 is actually quite different from the SV08 Max, and it's possible that if I'd been using the former, this would have been a whole lot easier. Unfortunately, neither myself nor Gemini were able to figure this whole thing out, so I eventually had to admit defeat. I called in for some help from the folks over at BigTreeTech, and the ever-patient Alan from their Klipper team logged in both to my computer via TeamViewer and to the printer itself via Octo Everywhere to get it fixed. Sadly, this took the better part of a week, so thank you very much, Alan. But on the bright side, now that the work has been done, BigTreeTech should be able to post those config files and instructions for how to install this unit on this specific printer. But coming back to my gripe about Sovol customizing their firmware in funky sorts of ways, it does turn out that the original SV08 Max screen is somehow not compatible with mainline Klipper. So I am gonna have to take a fun little side quest to install a 7-inch BigTreeTech touchscreen to actually get the Klipper screen functionality to work. Yeah, super annoying. Of course, none of this was BigTreeTech's fault whatsoever, and going forward, I really hope that they will create a repository of config files and setups for the many Klipper printers on the market today. I also suggested to them that they really might want to sell pre-flashed eMMC modules for the more common printers that people are planning to install this with. Because it really is a shame to have such a plug-and-play hardware experience be soured by hours of fiddling with drivers and flashing different boards and messing with Catapult, only to discover that some of the original parts of the printer still won't work. Now, I'd also be very curious to hear if it's just Sovol machines that put up this much of a fight. So if you have already tried installing this upgrade on an Elegoo, a Voron, RatRig, Creality, or any other type of machine, please do let the rest of us know in the comments what that was like. Now, while future Jonathan is hopefully getting the system working properly, let's go ahead and walk through how everything looks and functions UX and UI wise. On the unit itself, you can see we have 4 helpful LED lights. These not only indicate the current filament status, like many other MMU systems on the market, but also offer helpful animations to let you know when filament is loading, unloading, or switching between the different lanes. They're also apparently fully customizable. Inside the unit itself, we have RFID readers and a heating element, which is used to dry the filament. You can even dry the filament right from within the mainsail interface without actually going to the printer, which is super convenient. On the Klipper screen interface, BigTreeTech have apparently added a new custom window interface for managing the filament. This allows you to choose and assign the colors, select slots, extrude, and preload, the latter of which is very important because you unfortunately can't just shove filament into the ViViD system whenever you want, like other MMS systems. It will just spit the filament right out in the middle. Now, I wish I could show you guys this interface in action, but as I mentioned, I am currently waiting on a compatible HDMI screen, and this video is already like 3 weeks late, so sorry. Finally, on the mainsail web interface, there aren't really a lot of changes. You can see that they've added a lot of macros to allow you to do various things like checks and tests, loading and unloading, things like that. But if you're expecting bamboo level interface design for assigning the different filaments to each of the lanes right within mainsail, you are going to be a little bit disappointed, at least for now. And yeah, UX and UI wise, that's pretty much it. In a second, we'll hear from future Jonathan, who hopefully has this thing working well enough to be able to report back. But in the meantime, let me really quickly take a moment to thank PCBWay for making this video possible. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I don't know the first thing about designing my own custom PCBs or electronics, but I'm still a huge fan of PCBWay. Not only have I frequently used their metal 3D printing and CNC machining services, but I also love that they have an entire shared project section right on their website where I can try out and support other people's projects without having to design my own PCBs or electronics. So the next time you need something made in a technology that you just can't do at home, be it sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, or PCB manufacturing, I highly recommend that you try uploading your design on PCBWay's website to get a free and instant quote. Plus, don't forget to use my link to get $5 off on your first order. But now, let's get back to the video and see how the testing is going. All right, Philifab, it's been like a week since I wrote that, and I have been struggling basically nonstop to get this thing working. Now, in all fairness, as usual, most of the issues have been my own fault. You just try building something as precise and delicate as a filament cutter and sensor with what turns out to be a busted thumb. In any case, I ended up having to rebuild the entire extruder to get the sensor to be more accurate, and then the blade holders for the filament cutter kept breaking on me like a handful of times, and then they were too short. It's been a lot. It's been a lot. I was about ready to give up. I hate my life right now. Now, none of that is BigTreeTech's fault, and it's not even necessarily CN3D's fault, considering I made them heavily modify their proven design to fit the hardware that I had on hand. But I will just say that in retrospect, it probably would have been a lot wiser and a lot easier to just buy a complete toolhead kit, because tiny little variances in things like how far the blade protrudes, or the exact clearance of the ball bearing, or the precise angle of the PTF V-tube, they make a huge difference in how reliably this thing is going to be able to load and unload filament on its own. Anyways, as of right now, I can get the printer to somewhat reliably cut and change filament sometimes. I've configured the purging and the wiping, and I just need to fix the cutter, and I think I'll be ready to print beyond something that's just circles. So let's go ahead and skip to future Jonathan and see how that's going. Yeah, no, I'm done. Sorry to disappoint you guys, and of course the folks over at BigTreeTech. I really wanted to get this thing printing properly so I could show all of you guys how it works in action, but in between working out all the kinks with my particular install, a healthy dose of user error as always, a new puppy in the office that isn't letting me get any work done, and my wife starting a new job, I honestly am just not at a point in my life right now that I can afford to sink any more hours into this particular video. To be completely honest, I've already delayed the video like 3 times, and I've spent probably 20 plus hours fixing various issues, and every single time I fix one issue, another one seems to crop up. So I fixed the cutter and I chamfered the inside of the tool head hot end to improve the loading and unloading, but now every single time the printer finishes a swap, the whole thing crashes, and it gives me no clear indication as to why. So I asked Jacques, our resident Klipper expert over here, and he thinks it has something to do with the printer not being able to read the temperature in the dryer and executing a safety shutdown. But because BigTreeTech is closed for Chinese New Year, that's going to remain a question mark until they can come back. Now, that wasn't happening until yesterday, and I was able to do some basic sample prints. So it is entirely possible that between the 3 or 4 different times I had to uninstall and reinstall the unit and move it in here to film in this room, I might have damaged something somehow. Whatever it is, I'm pretty done at this point. Honestly, I kind of just want to restore this printer back to all original parts and firmware just so I can get it printing again. But maybe I'll upgrade the toolhead to an LDO Jabberwocky or something like that once I've gotten some space from the project. I just don't want to mess with it anymore right now. I do feel absolutely terrible because BTT gave me a huge opportunity to be the first to show this unit to all of you, and their team did spend countless hours helping me fix firmware stuff, and I definitely ended up the bed on this one. All I can say is that I really did give it my best shot, and I ultimately failed. I decided to proceed with this video anyways, not just because I honestly have to have something to show for all the hours that I've sunk into this, but also because I hope you guys will understand that your install will probably be much smoother than mine if you come after me, especially if you're installing on a printer running mainline Klipper, and especially if you use a tested and proven toolhead design rather than an untested one-off special that you have someone make for you based on whatever equipment you have on hand. Plus, I do think that it is informative to all of you guys to see that even if this is a polished and professionally made product, it still does require some skill on the toolhead assembly and firmware side to actually get it working properly. I don't think BigTreeTech would mind me saying that, but we'll have to see if they ever speak to me again. Anyways, once again, I'm really sorry to let everyone down, but I do have to move on to the next video and project because it is an absolutely massive one and I am more than a little stressed about it. So, what's my final verdict? Does this product deliver on the very exciting value proposition of being a plug-and-play MMU for your open source 3D printer? Kinda. But before I explain, I do need to disclose this video is not sponsored by BigTreeTech. They sent me this for free, but no money has changed hands for this video, but they have supported this channel financially in the past. I do consider many of the people at BTT to be personal friends, and their team spent like many dozens of hours helping me configure this thing. So all that is to say that I'm very biased in their favor. But with that said, I do have to say that the ViViD kind of left me confused and scratching my head. On the one hand, it does live up to its promise of being a well-polished, well-supported, and ready-made MMU for Klipper. Hardware-wise, it really is that plug and play. The problem is, this is still a product made for open source 3D printers, and that means that there are so many variables outside of BigTreeTech's control. You may get the MMU ready built, but you still need to build your own new toolhead to add a cutter and a filament sensor. You still need to spend a lot of time reading the manual, configuring the various parameters like purge and wipe, and just testing for reliability. No, it's not that hard to configure a handful of things like the cutting position, the wiping sequence, and the purging behavior, but some people, honestly myself included, absolutely hate messing with firmware. And unfortunately, that's very much the best case scenario, as in you're trying to install this thing on a printer that runs a mainline version of Klipper. If, like me, you're trying to install it on a customized version, then you're potentially in for a week of frustration as you try to get everything working, like your touchscreen or your eddy current sensor. At least for now. Again, none of this is BTT's fault. It's just the nature of creating a product for the diverse, wild west bazaar that is open source hardware. They really have no way of knowing what your exact setup looks like. And thus, the ViViD is kind of in a weird place in the market. The people who love building printers and have a Voron or something similar would probably enjoy building their own box turtle or Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder. And the people who don't love building printers and instead opted for something like a Sovol SV08 or a Creality K1C, well, they might not have the skills nor the desire to build a custom toolhead, configure parameters in Klipper, or test rigorously for reliability. And as with any of these systems, the Box Turtle, the ERCF, or the ViViD, I have absolutely no doubt that you can get it running reliably with enough testing, tweaking, and tuning parameters, but the burden to do so is squarely on you, finished and polished product or not. So then, who is this product for? Well, I guess that in a way, it very much caters to the type of customer who buys a Sovol SV08 or SV0. They want the solid foundation of a polished and ready-made open source product as a starting point rather than building an entire Voron, but they're also very comfortable tuning, tweaking, and modifying from that point on. After all, price-wise, the ViViD is extremely competitive. For under $350, it comes fully built with filament drying and RFID capability. Compare that to the LDO Box Turtle kit, which, although it does cost $50 less, doesn't include printed parts, doesn't have RFID or filament drying, and isn't even enclosed at that price. Not to mention the labor to actually build it. So yeah, while some people might actually enjoy building a box turtle, if you're just looking for the most polished product at the most affordable price with the most features, and you're aware that you're gonna need to do the firmware customization and toolhead upgrades either way you go, then the ViViD is a pretty exciting offer indeed. What's more, for the rest of the folks who don't like tinkering with hardware or firmware, I'm really hoping that BigTreeTech is going to offer things like pre-flashed eMMCs or upgrade kits for common printers, which include a toolhead kit, a touchscreen where required, or things like that. In the meantime, it's worth noting that you can buy a complete kit for a toolhead like the Jabberwocky from any LDO retailer, and in retrospect, I honestly wish that I'd just done that instead of trying to use the original parts and what I had on hand to upgrade the toolhead. No shade to my friends at CN3D, because the issues that I had were, of course, my own fault, and you know, it's me we're talking about. On that note, if you are interested in open source multicolor and multi-material projects, you definitely should check out the latest installment of my 7-headed SV08 tool changer build, which I am also doing in collaboration with CN3D. I'll go ahead and link that right down here for you to check out. That's all for this week, but I'll see all of you on the next layer.